Okay, Norm Berggren wrote a book called Ringmakers of Saturn. Norm's bona fides just are fantastic. I mean, he worked for 40 years for major aerospace companies. He was Lockheed 20 years. He's just a fantastic guy. He's 85 years old now. He got a hold of some Voyager pictures, and he was the one that showed us those big, huge vehicles in the rings of Saturn. Anyway, part of his theory is that the moon was placed in orbit in rotational lock. And this summer, when I was at the Bay Area UFO conference, I went to see him. He was at Stanford Hospital. He injured his shoulder. I drove over, picked up his wife, and took her over to see him. And I had an hour with him. It's just fascinating. He's so alert, and just really a great guy. And during the conversation, I said, Norm, where do you think that EMV, the electromagnetic vehicle that placed the moon in orbit around the Earth, where do you think it is now? He says, on the backside of the moon. Now, you have to understand that Norm Berggren was on the inside for many, many years. So if he says something like that, then you can be sure it's probably there. So when we started looking around Tsiolkovsky, the crater that looks like it has a little nice island in the Mare there, Beth in Florida started unmasking it, and there is what appears to be a huge EMV electromagnetic vehicle, and I think that's probably the one that towed the moon into orbit. Now, let me just read you. I asked Norm, would you email me a statement? And here's what he says. And also when he talks about the video, we're talking about the Apollo 17 video when they flew over Tsiolkovsky, and they filmed it at that time, and that video is on the, I think it's on on the internet, but I'm not sure. Anyway, here's what Norm Berggren says. Quote, the still images show the kind of illuminations one might expect of an EMV. Video, however, shows changing light variations well outside the highly illuminated area, suggesting that more is still going on than is evident in the stills. More work remains to find out how all of this fits together in the effort to try and answer specifically the what. We believe we have taken a step forward in calling attention to this very significant activity found on the moon. And that was written by Norm Berggren yesterday.
Well, Richard C.?
Richard, what do you think?
Well, all right, I'm coming at this from a little different perspective. I agree that the moon is not natural and it was towed into orbit.
You do agree with that?
Yeah. I mean, I haven't published the data yet.
Well, why does it look all tattered and smashed up?
Because it's a natural body that was... Look,
okay, maybe it was an asteroid or something huge like that.
Remember Arthur Clarke's third law? Any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic.
Right.
If you have the level of technology that I think was operative in the solar system quite a while ago.
Well, so you're saying it's a natural object towed in.
I think it was a natural object modified and towed into orbit, placed in orbit around the moon, around the Earth, to allow life on Earth to exist. In the hyperdimensional physics, which we, of course, don't have time to get into tonight, if the moon didn't exist, we wouldn't be here either.
And
life would not be here.
Velikovsky has numerous references of a long time ago when there was no moon.
Well, we're talking a long time ago, there was no moon, yes. Now, the difference between Berggren and me is that, when I look at an object on the surface, there is no way I can tell what it's used for. It's geometric, it doesn't belong, it's not natural by the criteria established by people like Sagan. Remember Sagan's great line? Intelligent life on Earth first manifests itself through the geometric regularity of its construction.
Mm-hmm.
That is a maxim that's useful anywhere, not just in the solar system, but anywhere across the galaxy and the universe. If you took a picture of a planet 500 light years away and somehow got it back here, I could look at it and, depending upon the resolution, tell you whether anybody had ever lived down there based on the geometry of the things we see in the image. That's the only remote sensing criteria we at the moment have to go on. So, you look at this thing in Tsiolkovsky, and Berggren thinks it's an EM vehicle. I have no idea what that is.
The electromagnetic vehicle.
Yeah, but I know what it means, but I just don't know how he could possibly tell. He's looking at light and dark pixels in a picture. How can he tell what it's used for? It may be a geometric shape that's not natural. How does he know it's a vehicle? I have some more interesting supporting data in favor of the artificial toed moon hypothesis. Back when I was advisor to Cronkite, I met the head of the lunar seismometry experiment, who was at Columbia University. He was a PI. NASA had picked him to design the seismometers to listen for moonquakes.
Okay.
And we spent considerable time because it was one of the things that I figured we could make available to people that would kind of humanize the space program. What I wanted to do was to turn the seismometer readings into musical notes, so that when we tuned in his instrument, instead of seeing squiggly lines on a piece of paper, which nobody could interpret except a scientist, we could actually hear the rumblings of the moonquakes in the moon. All right? So I got kind of close to him and his experiment, and I followed it during the entire mission. Well, when the first readings came back from the first seismometer put in place on Apollo 11, all hell broke loose. When they impacted the S-4B, which was one of the upper stages that sent them to the moon, vectored it into a crash on the moon rang like a bell for over an hour. And nothing on Earth seismically ever does that.
Well,
so
that makes it sound artificial, though.
Exactly. And in years later, I have figured out how this works, technically, by the numbers. Anyway, they put several more seismometers with the rest of the Apollo program down at the Apollo 12 site, the 14 site, the 15, 16, 17. In other words, we had a small network of seismometers. And by having a network and correlating the data, you can get a crude CAT scan of moonquakes going all the way down to the core. About 10, 11 years after the landings, they got enough data that this guy published a paper in Science, which I've got, showing two incredibly huge, definitely geometric, definitely symmetrical, definitely arc-shaped structures or masses or something buried, 1,000 miles beneath the surface of the moon down near the core, symmetrical about the Earth-Moon line. As soon as that data was published, NASA turned off all the seismometers, claiming they couldn't afford to keep them running. The cost to keep those seismometers running and get more data on the interior of the moon would have been about the cost